Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Onwards and Upwards, everything a global healthcare worker needs to know about living and working in the United States. I'm your host, Danielle Friedman from AMN Healthcare International, where we have direct hire and staffing, and so excited to be here with you this morning. We have our immigration Q&A. We have our experts. They are going to be here, ready, excited, and waiting to take your questions. Before we get started, I see we already have some chatter in the chat, but please let me know where you're watching from. Let me know if you have any questions from our experts. It looks like we have Jimsy from India. Hi, Jimsy. Lenny from Saudi Arabia. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you. Adenaki from Nigeria. Charles from Ghana. Angelito from Kuwait. We are covering the whole world, everybody. So hello to everybody, and thank you for joining. Again, we are doing our immigration Q&A, our monthly immigration Q&A. So please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. I will be taking questions throughout the show. As I said, I'm here from AMN Healthcare International, where we have direct hire and staffing. Let's pull up a map of all of the jobs that we have hiring right now. Okay, as you guys can see, we have opportunities in every one of the states. So wherever you may want to go, we are hiring at various times, and we are looking for nurses actively on both the direct hire and the staffing side. If you want to apply today, that link is going to be amnhealthcare.com/international, and our recruiters are on hand, ready and excited to help you find your American dream. All right, without further ado, let's bring in our experts. All right. Good morning, Mike and Chris. Very excited to have you both on this morning.
Hey, Danielle.
Hi. So let's just jump right in. Mike, I'm going to turn to you first. Can you tell us what happened last week? What update do you have for us with the visa bulletin?
Yeah, not much. I mean, move forward, a week. So at least it went forward, not backwards, but certainly not significant movement, but at least it did move forward a week. So
we'll take any movement we can get, right? That
absolutely.
is positivity. All right. And Chris, any updates from you on HWRA? Anything you can share?
No, I mean, there was an attempt a week or two back at the U.S. Congress to pass an immigration bill mainly targeted at the southern border, the U.S.-Mexican border, which is the subject of a lot of political debate and discourse here in the U.S. That bill, while it didn't include the HWRA, did actually include an increase to the employment-based visa quota, which I think would have been the first increase of any magnitude in, 25 or 30 years. That's the good news, that at least it's being considered. The bad news is the whole bill blew up when candidate Trump instructed the Republicans not to vote for it. So that part's disappointing. At this point, I think the idea of any sort of immigration bill, including HWRA, happening this year, I would say is a long shot at best. Maybe any law being passed the rest of this year is a long shot at best. That's the bad news. I think after the U.S. presidential election, which happens this November, the U.S.-Mexican border crisis just seems to be one of the top of mind political issues here in the United States. And so I guess it wouldn't surprise me if into next year there was a border deal. And at least if this bill becomes sort of a template for that bill, there is a chance for employment-based immigration, including potentially something like the HWRA, but we're talking 12 months from now. But I think for this year, it seems probably unlikely to me that anything would pass.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike and Chris, for your updates. If you are just joining us, Mike shared that the visa bulletin did move forward about a week, which is positive movement. We will take that instead of any kind of negative movement. So as you can see, rest of the world and Philippines move up to September 8th, 2022. And there we have India and China. So that is the update on the visa bulletin. So that is a positive step. And as we know with U.S. politics, we just don't know. So we'll see what happens this year with the election and everything. All right, so let's get started with some of these questions that we have in the chat. I see it is going off. We got lots of questions. So I see an interesting question from Anyi. Anyi says, has retrogression happened before, and how long did it last? Mike, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, retrogression has happened a number of times in the past, and for some countries in some categories, retrogression has been a constant. So it's not like an event happens and then retrogression happens. Retrogression happens when there are more people who are in the queue to get green cards than the numbers allocated. As Chris mentioned, the number of immigrant visas or green cards allocated hasn't changed for multiple decades, and so whenever there's more demand, which there is now and has been for quite some time, it simply a line forms. The idea that retrogression ends, it doesn't really end unless the line goes away. So we had a situation in 08, 09, where the lines for the most part went away, in part due to what people would refer to as either a Great Recession or depression, depending upon what news cycle you listen to. And so the demand went down, and because the demand went down, then the lines went away. And then likewise, over the last several years, we had kind of an artificial of the line going away because of COVID. Because during COVID, individuals on doing family-based green cards could not do interviews at the consulate because the consulates were closed. And so all of a sudden, that demand went away, and there was a spillover effect into the employment-based category. So retrogression as a concept only goes away if either the supply, the number increases, which is what Chris talked about, or if the demand decreases. So it's not like there's going to be a certain event that will happen outside of legislation that would change that.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So I think what I'm kind of taking from what you said is that retrogression has happened before. We've all experienced it. I know Mike and Chris have a lot of experience with retrogression. AMN has a lot of experience with retrogression. It's happened before. We'll get through it. We know how to handle it. And what advice would you give, Mike, to somebody who's kind of dealing with the anxiety of retrogression right now? What do we all?
I just want to clarify on behalf of myself and Chris, that sounded like a little bit of a shot at Mike and Chris have been through it many times in the past.
I just mean that you're seasoned experts. You know how to handle
I think that's the same, but that's okay. We'll get past that. So
nothing hurts like the truth.
It's a compliment.
Truth is tough, man. So here's what I recommend, and I think it's pretty easy, is that you do what you can control. And you control whether you take your test. You control whether you're getting the right documents. You control finding a job. You control passing your English test, dealing with visa screen, all those kinds of things, because they're in your control. What you can't control is how long the line is, because that's something out of your control, out of your whoever you get hired by's control. No one can control the length of the line. Right now, the line, if we were to project, I would project that if you got put in the line today, you got an I-140 filed today, approved, so that's when your party is established. Between 18 to 24 months, you're going to be to the front of the line. Now, if you wait 4 months before you act because the line seems too long to you, the line's still likely going to be 18 to 24 months. You're simply going to be 4 months down the road. So I'm saying do what you would is under your control to get in the line and move your case forward and allow the line to happen. It's not going to go away anytime soon. And so if you continue to wait, you're simply going to delay your process.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I think that is good advice. We hear it every month. Control what you can control, do what you can do, pass your English, pass your NCLEX, and most importantly, once you're ready to go, get your place in line. And what that means is get filed, get your priority date. That's your That's your magical date. That's how you can read the visa bulletin. That's how you know when you are going to be coming out of the line. And as we have said before, AMN is filing right now. So if you are interested in direct hire or staffing, get your priority date, get in line, amnhealthcare.com/international. Our recruiters are ready to help you find your perfect match. All right, so let's see. What other questions do we have in the chat? We have lots and lots of chatter. So we have a question. I see we have a few questions from some Indian nurses asking how long it will take to migrate from India after they start the process. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that or any wise words for our Indian nurses who are watching?
Yeah, so when I think of the Indian nurses, I put them into three distinct categories, and each have different timelines and frankly, different requirements. So the first criteria, or the first, bucket or category is if you are an Indian nurse and you have not ever begun any U.S. immigration process, which is to say you're about to maybe have your I-140 filed by a company. But my guess is that category honestly doesn't really exist. And the reason I say that is because the delay is without any legislative change, at least something like 12 years and probably even quite a bit longer than that. And that's because we had a retrogression question that Mike spoke about a few minutes ago. And it's bad for the Filipinos. Mike predicted, and I think that's totally correct, 18 to 24 months if you're a Filipino beginning your I-140 today. If you're an Indian nurse who files or who finds a sponsor who's willing to file her case today, I think that's a 12 to 15 year delay, which means that there's no real U.S. hospitals or companies that are going to do that. No company can predict what their needs are going to be in 2035 or something like that. So that's the first bucket. Essentially, if you're an Indian nurse and your goal is to get an immigrant visa, and that's really your only path to the United States, unfortunately, America is just not an option for you on that path. The second path, or the second category, is if you're an Indian nurse who has had their I-140 filed at some point in the past, ideally or on or before something like 2014, 2013. The current retrogression date for the EB-3 is July of 2012. If you had a immigrant visa filed for you, let's say before 2014, then I think that there is a chance that you can find a U.S. employer, and what they can do is they can file what we call a recapture petition. They'll recapture your priority date, which means that the new company who files for your I-140 today will include a copy of your old I-140 approval notice from 2011, 12, 13, 14, whenever it might have been. And your new company, when that I-140 is approved, it will actually be backdated back to that date when your case was originally filed. We do see a number of those at our law firm. I'll bet Mike will tell you the same. So that is a very real potential for you, and your likelihood of that working really comes down to how far back that date is on your prior priority date approval notice. And then the last bucket are non-immigrant visas. So if you are Canadian, if you are Indian born but Canadian, you can get a TN visa. You need to be a Canadian citizen. And so while you are likely going to have to go through the same retrogression timelines that I've outlined on your green card, that's the bad news. The good news is that because you have the TN, you can get into the United States fairly quickly as long as you've passed the NCLEX and you have a visa screen. Likewise, there are not many, but there are some employers out there who are filing H-1Bs for nurses. There's not that many U.S. employers who are eligible to file H-1B for nurses, but we do have a handful of them here at the law firm, and there's a handful, maybe more than a handful across the United States. Those jobs are a little different because there tend to be a little more experience required than conventional floor nurses, but they're out there. And if you find that and you can find a U.S. sponsor for the H-1B visa for you, you can normally enter the United States also in just a few months. So those are the three categories, which is I've never filed an EB-3. And again, that category, I say it, but it's more or less non-existent. There's I have a old EB-3 that I can recapture that priority date, and that we, I'll bet not a month goes by that we're not filing at least one case like that. And then the third category is some of these non-immigrant visa options like the TN and the H-1B.
Okay, thank you, Chris. A really good summary for options for Indian nurses. And we're going to talk a little bit more about H-1Bs and about TNs. But before we jump in, I realized I was so excited to get started with our questioning. I did not even let you both introduce yourselves. Can you please introduce yourselves and tell everybody why I called you seasoned experts? So you guys are the best in the business and you've had a lot of experience, but I'll let you tell the viewers.
Well, I'm going to start so I can set the groundwork. My name's Mike. I've been practicing law for about 4 months. This year, 2 months, but a little longer for other years. So I'm going to go with that.
And if you didn't catch that, he said for a lot of other years after that, 4 months plus a lot of other years. So Mike really knows what he's doing.
That's
short.
Yeah, and I'm Chris Mastillo, and the first lawyer that hired me was Mike. So I'll let you figure out how long I've been practicing that. So
I don't know if I knew that in all of the time that I have been doing these shows. Wow.
Yeah, Mike and I worked together for many years. I learned quite a bit from him in just a few months, apparently.
Amazing. Okay, well, that is why I called.
I want to know what's his shirt says, though. I can't make it out.
What does your shirt say?
This is going to give everybody a laugh. This is from my Brooklyn half marathon I did back in the spring.
Nice. Jesus.
So
wow.
This is in honor of you, Chris, today. New York City runs Brooklyn.
That's
you did
great.
The Brooklyn half marathon?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
that's
I
We've run a number of those races.
Wow. I can barely even run a mile. That's very impressive.
Mike and I used to play basketball. He did no running on the basketball court, but no. You get him out there in the half marathons and he can accomplish those. He can run.
I mean, honestly, that is a feat. I think if anybody is watching that is a marathon runner, I've seen some of my friends train for those. That is impressive. So now you've impressed me with your immigration expertise and your running expertise. So impressive this morning. All right, everybody. So we are here. We are doing our immigration live Q&A. If you have any questions for Mike and Chris, we are excited and ready to take them. So please put them in the chat. So I'm seeing a couple of questions about regular versus premium processing. I know we got a long question from Okpa. Okpa, we're going to answer your question now. Okpa was asking about if you still suggest to file premium. Okpa is feeling a little bit of anxiety about not being filed premium and wants to know if that should be a suggestion or if it doesn't really matter to the processing times. So I'm going to let you take this one, Mike. Okay. What are your thoughts on premium versus regular processing?
Yeah, my recommendation is that unless you have an earlier priority date that you're recapturing and you're current now, that there is no legal reason to premium process. Keep in mind that premium processing makes the I-140 process go faster, but does not put you ahead in the line or in the queue or affect retrogression or affect how quickly you get your visa appointment or anything like that. It only affects the I-140. And keep in mind, you get your priority date established when your case is filed, not when your case is approved. So as long as the processing time is less time than the retrogression, and it by far is, I mean, right now we're seeing regular processing, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months, depending on service centers. Then there's, in my opinion, there's no reason to file under premium processing. Keep in mind too, the cost is $2,500 now. It goes up to $2,800 something here in a few weeks. So it's extremely expensive to, in my opinion, gain no discernible value whatsoever.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So let me see if I understand what you're saying. So it doesn't really behoove you to be filed premium because you get your priority date, the date that your I-140 is filed. That's the important date. So it doesn't necessarily matter when you get approved. The important date is when you're filed, and that's how you're going to know that you're ready to come out of the line and kind of continue on with the process. Correct?
Correct.
All right, so there you go, Okpa. Hopefully that helps you. I see we have lots of questions. We have one from Cindy RM. Cindy says, is every country affected by the retrogression? Are there countries that could be advancing their interview dates? Chris, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Yes, every country is impacted by the retrogression. If you look at the visa bulletin, you'll see normally the visa bulletin pops out normally 4 or 5 countries. It's usually China, India, Mexico, the Philippines. Occasionally, there's a few of the Central American countries, but then there's a 5th column, which is the worldwide, or sometimes we call it the all other, and that is that's all other. That's every single other country, the other, I don't know, 250 countries, however many countries there are. And frankly, over the last something like 5 or 7 years or so, the all other category, the Mexico category, and the Philippine category have all run in lockstep. So even though we've had an all other category, really the way that we've been thinking about it over the last few years is that it's really just a China retrogression, and India retrogression, and then all the other countries, at least with respect to EB-3.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for that little summary. And let's pull up that graphic of the current visa bulletin so you can kind of see what Chris is talking about. It's broken down by rest of world, by Philippines, India, and China. So that can help you kind of figure out which category you might be in. All right, so let's take another question. It looks like Paul has a question. Paul says, hi, is it true that there was a filing pause last January and February for agencies to file an I-140 for the USCIS? I don't know if I knew about this. Was there a filing pause, Mike? Do you know anything about that?
There was not. No, there was no time where we were not permitted to file I-140s.
Okay, well, there you go, Paul. Not sure where you're getting that information, but happy to tell you there has been no time where we are not filing I-140s. I think everybody's very, very actively filing I-140s right now, getting everybody their place in line. Let's see. We have lots and lots of questions. I see we have a question from John. John says, is it possible to have an H-1B visa and an EB-3 application at the same time? Chris, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Yes, it's not only possible, it's honestly quite common. The question may be stemming from the fact that there are some non-immigrant visas, like student visas, for instance, where I don't want to say it can't happen, because it absolutely can happen. We can have a student visa and an EB-3 at the same time. It's just a little more delicate and probably beyond the scope of this kind of a session. But to answer the question, yes, it's very common for there to be an H-1B, and contemporaneously we're filing an EB-3.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And for those of us who may be watching and maybe feeling like, okay, well, I'm hearing about an H-1B and I'm hearing about a TN, I don't really know exactly what that means. Mike, can you give us just a little snippet of what those two options are? What do they mean?
Sure. So I'll do the TN first, because that's the simplest one. A TN is just a non-immigrant visa category derived from treaties, and it's available only to individuals who are citizens of Canada or Mexico. And then there's a list of occupations under that treaty that individuals can obtain a TN. So if your occupation is on that chart, you can get a TN. If you're from Mexico or Canada, if your occupation's not on the chart, you can't. So it's very different than, say, the H-1 rules. Registered nurse is on the chart. OT, PT, MedTech is on the chart. Things like RadTechs, et cetera, are generally not on the chart specifically. One of the advantages of a TN is it's fast. If you're from Canada, You can apply at the border or at the airport. So you could realistically, if you have your NCLEX pass, have applied for a state license, even though you may not have the license yet. And in most states, you can't get the license until you have a social security number. But have the visa screen, and you get an offer today. Today's Friday. If you've got an attorney assigned other than myself or Chris, if it's someone in our office who's fast and good at getting stuff done, you could be in and working on Monday. So it could happen that fast. If you're from Mexico, you have to go to the U.S. consulate. So it does take a little bit longer, but not significantly longer because the U.S. consulate in Mexico schedules TN visa appointments fairly quickly. So you could realistically be in like 4 weeks. So, and the visa is initially good for 3 years, and it can be ultimately converted to a green card, even though that has some a little bit of trickiness to it, but it certainly can be done. So TN, very simple. So for a lot of individuals, particularly those who are from India or China, particularly we see a lot of Chinese nationals who first immigrate to Canada and use Canada as kind of a bridge to the U.S. They move to Canada on a visa or a landed immigrant status, and then ultimately become a Canadian citizen, and then make themselves eligible for the TN. So that's a fairly common route we see. Now with H1s are a little more complicated. Chris alluded to earlier the fact that there's a handful, and I think that's probably a fair description. I think there's a lot of companies, hospitals that explore H1Bs. There's not as many who actually end up filing for them. To get an H1B, you have to demonstrate that the position requires, or the normal standard for the position is a BSN. So you, if you're on this call, you likely have a BSN. A lot of individuals, the typical education in the Philippines and India, a lot of other countries is a BSN. Not everywhere, but a lot. So you may meet the standard of having a BSN, but the standard in the US for most nurses is not a BSN. There's no state that requires a BSN. You can get a license with an associate's, a diploma type program. So there's no state regulatory requirement. However, there are some hospitals and certain units within those hospitals, maybe a NICU unit, maybe an OR, et cetera, where the hospital wants, or their normal standard is they want a little higher education, maybe a little more experience in order to go in that position. And then they can file H1Bs for you. So limited scope and availability, but they are out there.
Okay, thank you, Mike. That was a very good summary of the TN visa and the H1B visa as additional options for our nurses. If you're watching and you want to know more about the TN visa, about the H1B, or about the EB-3, we have free guidebooks on our website. So there's free information in there. You could download your guidebook today. The link is in the chat, and you can get all the tips and tricks, lots of hot information in there. From our team and from our team of attorneys. So make sure to download those free guidebooks and get all that information that you need. All right, so let's take some more questions from the chat. So I see Ofa says, oh, now I just lost Ofa's question. Okay, I see Lenny's question. Lenny says, I have my priority date, March 2023, and I've completed everything. Would it be advisable to apply to another country while waiting to be current? I'm thinking maybe Lenny's asking about going to work in another country, but I'm not sure. Chris, what are you getting from this question, and what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I PD of March of 2023. Let's assume this candidate is Filipino, or at least not Indian, Chinese national. The current priority date is November of 2022. So that is, 6 months or so, not even. So I would say it's probably not advisable, but it depends. I mean, if it's a 90-day assignment in another country, sure, I don't see any problem in that, but I probably wouldn't sign a year-long contract.
Okay, there we go, Lenny. Some good advice for you. And for others who may be watching, who may have priority dates that are further down in the line, or who may have just established a priority date, what are your thoughts of working in another country, Chris? Do you think that would be beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be. It's probably very specific to that individual. But I often say this in the immigration thing. It's very easy to be distracted by all these other things. Can I do this? Can I do that? Should I go to another country? Should I move my visa to another my appointment to another embassy or consulate? And all those questions are interesting. But in my mind, I like to focus and solve the big picture stuff first. And in my mind, the big picture is I want to get to America. And so at least that's my impression with most of the nurses we work with. That's their number one goal. And everything else is secondary. And so if it's a close call between going to another country and switching your embassy out or any of these kinds of things, my advice would be focus on the big picture, which is I want to get to the US. And all of those things might ultimately delay that process. And I've yet to find the nurse who wants this process to take longer. So that would be my advice. But again, everybody's situation is a bit specific.
Okay, good advice for our viewers who may be watching and thinking, what should I be doing during the meantime? What other thoughts, Mike, would you have for a nurse to be doing in the meantime? I mean, could they be upping their experience, or what else could they be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's critical is to work with your case manager to understand what's expected of you. I mean, there's a lot of hospitals that have made offers based upon the fact that you're still doing patient care work. And so if all of a sudden you spend the 6 months or 9 months waiting for a visa interview, doing a data entry for an insurance company, that may be problematic. So if you're looking to change jobs or anything like that, I think it's really important to work with your account manager. And I think, as Chris mentioned, the idea of, well, I'm going to take this 2-year assignment in Saudi Arabia, and I want my consult switched there, almost inevitably results in delays. So if that's really the right answer for you and your family, make sure you're talking to your case manager so they know, so that they can make sure that the hospital that's sponsoring you knows that likely you're not coming in at the 18 to 24 month mark, but that you're going to finish your 2-year commitment and then you're going to come in. So I think you've got to deal with this on a what's good for you personally and your family and your career, and interact with your case manager on this. They're there to help you and provide you guidance to make this process as seamless as possible. So reach out to them, talk to them, get their opinion.
I think that is some good advice from our experts, Mike and Chris. If you are waiting out the retrogression, you're waiting to become current and thinking, what could I be doing during this time? Talk to your case manager, talk to your attorney before making any big life decisions. You want to make sure that you are along the right path and that we can get you here as soon as we can get you here. So don't want to put any roadblocks in the way. So I see we have a couple of questions about filing documents about filing petitions after documents have been received for the attorneys. I see Ashish says, how long does it take for attorney to file for H-1B petition after receiving all documents from employer and employee? I think Ashish means. Maybe it's a kind of hard one to answer because maybe everybody does everything differently and it probably depends on the case. But what are your thoughts on this, Chris? I see your face looking a little befuddled.
Well, because, I think sometimes that the nurses think that the only documents that are part of this process are their documents. There's also a whole slew of documents that have to come from the employer. And in some instances, there's also third-party documents that have to come, maybe educational evaluations. So the answer is you're really only seeing a third of the sort of process. You're not seeing the whole process. And so in some instances, if the other 2/3 of the process are completed, then most employers, attorneys can file it in, a week or so. But in other instances, there may be documents that are going to take weeks and weeks. And then there's at least 2 other considerations that, again, have nothing to do with the nurse's submission of documents. Is the hospital might not want, or the healthcare facility might not want the documents filed for a number of reasons. One is there's a fee to file these cases, and hospitals have budgets, and they may have budgeted only so much money for this month, and so therefore your case is in the next cohort for the next month or the next quarter. There could be reasons why the hospital is staggering the filings because they don't want all of the nurses to come to the United States at once. Because when the nurse comes, they have both formal and informal training sessions. They have housing issues they need to get into. So I think the fallacy to this question is to think that just because you have submitted all of the documents, that means that that the case isn't being filed. And one other piece of this, and I can say this pretty confidently, the attorneys don't want to hold on to, there's no logical reason why the lawyers wouldn't file your case if everything's ready. Mike's firm and our firm, we file thousands of these petitions a year. So the issue isn't that the attorney is sitting on your case. In almost all instances, I don't want to speak for every situation. The issue is usually something that you're unaware of. And so you can ask your case manager about that. And there may even be issues that your case manager isn't aware of, because again, there's some of these issues that are the hospital's consideration. But in any event, the key thing is, don't think that because you've submitted all your documents that means that the case is ready to be filed. Very often it's not.
Okay, that's good advice from you, Chris. My husband always says, give people the benefit of the doubt. So, you never know. There could be things working in the background. That's why it's so important to stay in touch with your attorneys, to stay in touch with your case manager, so you can keep a pulse on your application, and if there's anything else going on in the background that maybe you might not know about. So good advice there, Chris. So I see a number of questions asking for predictions. I know we get this every show, and you guys are generous enough usually to offer a prediction. I know we're in an election year. Things have kind of changed. Maybe it's hard to give a prediction, but I'm sure our viewers are very curious what you think is going to happen with the visa bulletin over the next few months. So Mike, you want to go first?
Sure.
Advice or
happy
words
to go first for this one. This is good. We obviously saw a very small forward movement in March, which would indicate that we're likely going to have a small or no forward movement in April and subsequent months. Keep in mind that the way the visa bulletin works is we get an allotment of new immigrant visas on October 1st, when the fiscal year ends. Our fiscal year starts, I'm sorry. When that number's exhausted, it's done. There's no spillover. We don't have extras at the end of the year. It's like a use it or lose it. So if they don't issue immigrant visas for all of them, it's done. They tend to want to spread them out over the course of the year, right? But once they get enough people that they consider to be either from the consulate side DQ'd and eligible for an interview, or from the USCS side, which are individuals here in the United States who have 485s, they generally then kind of say, we already have enough people to process in the line that are already eligible between now and September 30th, which would be the end of the fiscal year. So they don't want to add more people. There's no advantage to them adding more people to it. So likely, we generally only see this in the summer, but certainly in past years, we've seen it earlier, is we call them like summer retrogression, or sometimes the categories become unavailable. That doesn't mean you're further back in the line. It just means that they've used up all of the visas for this particular year. So I'm going to predict limited or no movement in April. Sorry.
All right. Well, we appreciate the prediction, and we want to hear what your thoughts are. Chris, what are you thinking? Do you
No, I mean, I think Mike has laid it out exactly correct.
All right. So there you have it. So I guess we'll wait to see what happens. But, I think let's still keep in mind some words of advice for everybody who's watching who may feel disappointed by this news, which I can understand. I would feel disappointed too. It's a long process, and retrogression is just a delay. We are still filing you. We will get you here. It may just take a little bit longer. So we will keep an eye out. We'll continue to do our monthly immigration sessions. Our experts will take your questions. And as we say on this show, control what you can control. So let's try to also, keep it positive, do all the things that you can do while you are waiting for your processing to happen. Okay, so I see we have some more questions in the chat. Lots and lots of questions for our experts. So Arlen is saying, is there a chance my I-140 is approved even though I have not yet passed my English test? So this is, I think I know the answer, but I'm going to leave it to the experts. Chris, I see your face. You're ready to take this one.
Okay. Yeah. So is there a chance? There's only a chance if your I-140 has been filed. If it's been filed, your lawyer should not have filed it unless they thought it was going to be approved. So that's the answer to the question. Maybe more broadly, you do not need to have passed your English exam in order to have your I-140 filed. From the nurse's perspective, the nurse needs to have passed NCLEX in order to have their I-140 filed. Again, like we were talking before in my last question, there are some other things that need to happen with the employer, including things like a financial analysis of their company, notice postings, a prevailing wage determination, et cetera. But from the nurse's perspective, the real key thing is that you've passed the NCLEX exam. The English exam is one of the components of the visa screen, and the visa screen is not required until you're going to the embassy. Having said all that, I'm assuming that the nurse is outside the United States, by the way. But in any event, to answer the question, if your I-140 was filed, presumably it should be approved, or else you should be asking why your I-140 was filed if they didn't think it was going to be approved.
Okay, well, there you go. Some good information about filing and English exams and when everything happens. If you are watching and you are kind of thinking, all right, I sort of understand the process, but it's a little confusing to me, you are not alone. It can be a very confusing process. So what we have tried to do here at AMN International is distill everything down into 7 easy steps for you. So I know there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of acronyms we're talking about, a lot of legalese. Sometimes it can kind of make your head explode a little bit. So let's turn to our handy success path, which we often turn to on these shows to help you figure out how to get to America. What is your path going to look like? So step 1 is going to be passing the NCLEX. So this is your golden ticket. This is how you're going to move through each of the next steps. This is how you get started. Once you have passed the NCLEX, you are going to prepare for an interview. So our recruiters at AMN Healthcare International are going to help you figure out, is it better for you to go the direct hire route or the staffing route? We're going to help match you with your perfect employer. As I showed you earlier, we have employers all over the United States that are actively hiring at various times. So we are going to help you find your perfect match. Once you get a successful interview and you get a job offer, you are going to move to steps 3 and 4, which is where we do the visa processing and help you with the licensing and credentialing. So our teams are going to help you gather all the documents you need, whether you're coming on an EB-3, a TN, an H-1B, whatever it may be. We're going to help work with your lawyers to make sure that everything is as it should be, and help you get that license if you need a visa screen, all of that kind of good stuff in steps 3 and 4. Step 5 is going to be the get ready game plan. So this is going to happen once you are approved at the U.S. consulate. So you've had your interview, you've waited this long process, you've done everything you could, and now you get to celebrate because you are going to be on your way to the United States. Step 6 is the arrival sequence. This is where you touch down in the U.S. We have our team that is here that is going to be helping you to get you from the airport, to get you to your employer, and make sure that you are all set up for success. And then step 7, which is enjoy and prosper. And this is our goal for all of our nurses at AMN Healthcare International, with both our direct hire and our staffing side. We want everybody to come and prosper and do well. So if you are looking at that success path and thinking, where can I find it? It's on our website. You can always turn back and figure out where you are in your processing. And if you were inspired and you think, okay, now might be the time for me to apply, you can apply on our website, amnhealthcare.com/international. And our recruiters are on hand, ready and waiting to take your questions. So let's turn back to our live immigration Q&A. If you have any questions for our attorney experts, Chris and Mike, please put them in the chat and we will be happy to take your questions. All right, so let's see. We got lots and lots of questions. We have a question from Seema. Seema says, for an RN on an F1 one-year OPT, how long can I expect my green card? So maybe you can talk a little bit about what the options are for an OPT and then answer Seema's question. Mike, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Sure. So with a one-year OPT, RNs are not considered STEM, so you do not get the extension. One of the things that's really critical is to have the hospital that's hiring you start the process as quickly as possible once you pass your NCLEX and actually join them, because you obviously only have the 1 year. The way the process works now, oh, and the other thing that's important is to find a hospital that has a PWD that's ready, so that you can file your I-140 as quickly as possible. The way that Q and retrogression is working right now, you're not going to be able to file your 4085 within a year. They use what's called the date for filing chart. The date for filing chart in March is February 1st, 2023. So it's backed up over a year, or right at a year. We don't expect that to move until October, which means that you're going to have a gap. You're going to have a period of time where you're eligible to work in that 1 year OPT, and then you're not going to be able to work under that OPT while you're waiting to still file your 45. So there are various kind of options that hospitals are looking at to fill that gap. And the most common ones, some of them we've already talked about. Some hospitals will look at a TN, or if you're eligible for a TN, or any of the other odd categories like E3 or H1B1. Some hospitals will look at the H1B. The most common path we see, though, are individuals who go back to school and enroll in a program, either another bachelor's level program, maybe a master's level program, etc. And there are some master's level programs that will provide you what people refer to as first day CPT, which means that you can get work authorization through your school at the beginning of your program. Not all schools offer that, but there are some who do. So you're looking to bridge the gap from whenever your priority date becomes current, from the time your OPT ends at the hospital, and to when you can file a 45 and get a new EAD. So it's become a little complicated because of retrogression, but it is still very possible, very doable. Most hospitals are willing to sponsor for that, and I'm sure AMN is as well with a lot of their hospitals as well. It just is trickier because of only the 1 year.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So a good question from Seema and a good answer from Mike. So thank you, Mike, for the information. So I see we have a question in the chat from Rolf Tan. Rolf says, my I-140 got approved under regular process. When is the best time to file for an adjustment of status? So Chris, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, I mean, if you're eligible to file an adjustment of status, no time like the present. There's no real best time. The only caveat I'd put to that is if you have international travel plans, you will want to talk with your attorney about that, because you'll want to strategize a good timing on that. But candidly, this is a question that's probably very specific to you and a conversation you should be having with the lawyers you're working with.
Okay, so there you go, Rolf Tan. You can file right away if that is your situation, but definitely take into consideration the advice of your attorney for your specific situation. Okay, so we also have a question from Lizelle. Lizelle says, it's been 8 months and I still didn't receive any update on my I-140. The last time was the notice of receipt. I always check online, but when do you think I can receive an update from USCIS? So I'm sure just generally, a lot of nurses are sitting there kind of waiting for updates. What advice would you have for them? Is there anything that they can kind of do? Mike, I'll turn to you for this.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, no. You were at the waiting of whatever the USCIS is going to process your case. So, you know, aside from premium processing, which we already discussed, likely has absolutely no help. It's a matter of just being patient and waiting. I do believe you can register with the USCIS, and instead of checking online every day, I believe they will actually send you an update when there's any action taken on your case by simply registering with the My USCIS. But no, just wait, just be patient. Keep in mind, your priority date is moving throughout that whole 8 months. So if you filed 8 months ago, your priority date is sometime in 2023. So you're getting closer and closer every day toward being current. So don't think that it's a lost 8 months. You were going to have to wait anyway during that 8 months.
Okay, so some good advice for you, Liesel. I'm sure a lot of our nurses are watching and waiting, and we're all kind of at the beck and call of the US government, but also good advice for Liesel to keep in mind that you have your place in line, which is good news, and you are continuing to process as the line is moving, and eventually we will get to 2023 and we will get you to the United States, Liesel. Okay, so let's see. We have a question from Ocufil. Ocufil says, I'm in Canada, scheduled to write my NCLEX in a few months. Do you assist Canadians with the TN visa? Well, good news for you, Ocufil. We do. We do assist Canadians with the TN visa on both the direct hire and the staffing side. So there was a two-part question. So that's the first part that I took. So if you are a Canadian citizen and you are interested in coming to the United States, AMN can help you. We are actively filing TN visas. That's amnhealthcare.com/international. And we'll be happy to help you find an employer. Second question, I'm going to turn to my attorney experts. Akfil says, after a few months, I intend on changing my mind to do an adjustment of status green card via the EB-3 route. Will I also have to wait until my priority date is current before adjusting my status if I previously submitted my I-140? So Chris, I'm going to turn to you for this one.
So I like the idea of he plans on changing his mind, because that's an interesting turn of phrase. You should talk to your attorney about this. This is not something to be taken lightly on a chat like this. But what you're suggesting is possible, but it's pretty delicate. And if it's not done properly, you run the risk of being denied for immigration fraud. So the better approach is to actually talk to an attorney about your specific case and about specific timing.
Okay, so there you go, Akfil. So that's why I turn to the attorneys for the sensitive questions. I let them take those ones. But if you are interested in coming on a TN visa, we would be very excited and happy to help you find your employer in the US. And then your attorney can help you discuss what other options may be available to you. Okay, so I see we have lots of questions and not so much time, so we will try to take as many as we can. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I see we have nurses watching from all over the world, nurses from Gambia, Abu Dhabi. I'm seeing lots of different names here in London. So hello to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be watching from. We are so happy to have you with us and so happy to have our attorney experts with us taking questions. So please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to as many as we can. Okay, so Donna De Juan is asking, is it more complicated to file an EB-2 than an EB-3? I understand that an EB-2 is filed if you have a master's degree or PhD, but is it going to be complicated to apply if I fall in the EB-2 category? Mike, can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, eligibility for the EB-2 category is dependent in part upon your qualifications, but it's also dependent in part on the qualifications of the job that you're doing. So registered nurses would not fall under EB-2. pharmacists, OTs, PTs, those individuals where the standard for admission, getting a license, getting a job is a master's or higher would be what would fall under EB-2, EB category. With RNs, about the only thing we see is every once in a while we'll see what we refer to as a nurse educator or maybe a nursing professor who has an MSN, who is then in one of those positions, and you could demonstrate that an MSN is required for that position, and then you can do an EB-2. Nurses have special provisions that allow them to go through the green card process by skipping stage one being the labor certification or PERM. Most EB-2 categories, but not all, do not skip that. So even if you were say a nursing professor, you would not skip stage one. So the process would be a little longer, but if that's the category you fit in, then that's the category that would be pursued on your behalf.
All right, Donna. So some interesting information for you there on the EB-2. Definitely something you're going to want to discuss with your attorney and figure out if that is the right category for you. So it looks like we probably have time to take one more question. So we have a question from Danny Lynn. Danny says, my priority date is in 2017 and I was submitted to the NBC, but I did not submit the requirements because I'm already working in the UK. Will there be a problem in recapturing my priority date? I have a copy of my approval notice. Chris, you want to take this one?
There could be, because you're the company that sponsored you back in 2017 could seek to withdraw your I-140, which just always adds problems to the recapture process. So it could be the case. And so if you are interested in coming to the US, I would encourage you to explore that potential soon, because you're eligible to come to the United States. And like I said, I think sometimes it's very easy to say, oh, well, I'll just stay here another 6 months or a year, or whatever it might be. And that's fine, but I don't think you're really thinking about it in the larger scope. But so it could be problematic. The longer you wait, the more likely I think that something could have a problem.
All right. So Danny Lynn, now is your time. Now's your time to apply to AMN, and now's your time to recapture that priority date. amnhealthcare.com/international for Danny Lynn and anybody else who is watching and interested in coming to the United States. All right, everybody. Well, we are closing in on the hour. Thank you to our amazing expert attorneys. I learn new things literally every time we do these shows. So we very much appreciate your time answering all of our questions. And thank you to all of our viewers who are watching around the world. We appreciate your questions. We appreciate all of the AMN Healthcare International love, and we are so excited to help you find your perfect match and reach your American dream. Before we go, let's bring up our schedule of upcoming shows for the next month. So we have our Onwards and Upwards and LaFora Talk Show shows, which are at 7 a.m. Pacific. On March 1, we have Career Day. March 22nd, we have another immigration Q&A, so we'll get an update on the visa bulletin then. And on February 20th, we have a LaFora Talk Show on working with physicians. So should be an interesting one. We also have our upcoming AMN Academy shows, which are every Monday at 5 a.m. Pacific with our partners iPass, Swoosh, 9.09er, and Aspire RN. So make sure to take advantage of those free classes. All right. Well, thank you so much to our attorneys. Thank you so much to our viewers. We will see you next time, and have a great weekend, everybody. Onwards and upwards.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.